Welcome back to TwistBase. In today's tutorial we're going to have a deeper look into how to build your own floor plan and how to add zooming and horizontal or vertical panning to it all at the same time. Basically like a functionality you would expect from a Google Maps app or any navigation app where you can zoom in the map in and out and you can pan on the X and Y axis all at the same time. And we're going to do that all from scratch. Also, if you're interested in more in-depth courses, make sure to visit twistbase.com for more cool Flutter tutorials. So let's have a quick look at the project overview. If you go to the pubspec.yaml file, you can find what dependencies we got, and at the moment it is just going to use a provider package, which we are going to use for state management. Then if you go to the shared folder, there's one global.dart file, and it contains an abstract class called global, which is just going to use our main accent color and then our local data, which we are going to use to display some items on our custom map. Let's also have a quick look at the finished product, so at least you guys know what you will be building today. So when you start up, you're going to see the state start by dragging with your fingers. When we start dragging, obviously this disappears and we go to the state where you can customize pan on the map or zoom in on the map. Notice that we have different states for here as well. This is kind of an overview state for the circles where it shows you the number of objects in that field. So at here we got 3 items, at here we got 1 item, and this is just to give you a clear overview of what or how many objects are actually there. Then imagine your map is a bit lost and you don't know where it is. You can always hit the reset button and it brings you back to the home screen. Great, so let's get started by navigating to the main.dart file, and you can see I've already set up the provider, the multi-provider for you, which is currently at the moment it's going to be empty, but this is where we would manage our states, but that will be clear by the end of the course as well. So going back to the main.dart file, when you hit a hot restart or you run to start the project, you're going to see just an empty container, which is fine for now. So now let's actually display some content. Let's go to our screen folder, right click on it and import a new Dart file. And this is going to be our main screen, basically the floor plan screen. So let's call it floor plan screen. Let's type in stls for stateless widget and name our class name, floor plan screen. Great. Hit Alt Enter on the container to import the missing material library, so the errors will go away. Right, so now let's start with the root of our build method, and that should be a scaffold method, because if you expect the screen, it should always have a sort of app bar you can navigate to, or for some icons in there, and also a body which is going to display your main content. So let's add in the app bar, which for now is just going to be an empty or default app bar provided by Flutter. And let's create our body, which at the top, remember when we look at the example, it's going to have some rounded borders, right, at the top left and the top right corner. You could simply do that by adding a clip_rrect, and the clip_rrect has access to a border radius property, which then you can use border radius.only and specify the tops you want to be rounded, right? So for us, in our case, it's going to be top left and top right. So let's call radius.circular and specify our radius. I think 40 is quite nice. Let's hit a comma. Let's just copy the whole line, paste it, and change this to top right. There you go. And just hit a comma in here. Do Control S. Just put a semicolon at the end. Do Control S, and it gets nicely formatted. So now let's add a child to our clip_rrect as well. That child is gonna be a container. And that container is gonna display the main color, which we can use from the blue color we specified in the global file. So let's do that. Color global dot. Let's import it first. Alt Enter, and now we have access to the blue property. Let's give the container also a child. And that child should be the grid view widget. And that is a widget we still have to create, but I'm going to add it in for now. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment it out. And let's just give it no child at the moment, so it doesn't really matter. Let's create that child. Let's just create an empty container as a child for now. And what you do want to do is, let's center this for now. Let's just do a hot restart to see if we're displaying the right content. We still need to go to the main.dart file and move this away, and then type in our floor plan screen. Do a hot restart again. Great, so we're displaying the container with the border radius. To build a custom app bar widget, let's remove the default app bar and let's add a, we can use an empty container again, but of course it is expecting, if you see the error, it is gonna expect a preferred size type container, preferred size widget. So what you could do temporary is wrap this with a preferred size widget. So preferred size. So now the error goes away, but this is going to contain or another widget we will create in a bit. And then you actually want to set the preferred size. And then you set preferred size, or you can do size.fromHeight, and our custom height is going to be around 100 pixels. So you can see quite wide, like this, right? So that's the main setup. And at the moment it's going to display an empty container. So now let's go to the widget folder, right click on the widget folder and create a new Dart file. I'm going to call that app bar widgets. Let's make it stateless, stless, and let's create the class name as well. So app bar widgets, great, import. Actually, make sure it's material or Cupertino. There we go. So at the root of the app, this is where we would customize stuff with an app bar itself. Let's give it an elevation, which means the kind of shadow you will see in a default bar. Let's make it null, because if you want to keep things quite minimal, that's the way you should go. Let's give it a, so let's see, at the root of this, it's going to contain a column, because we're going to stack these two, which is an icon and a text. We're going to stack them vertically, right? So let's give it, let's see, the app bar. Let's give it a child column, add some children. There we go. Now it's going to say the parameter child isn't defined. This is because we are in the wrong directory. We actually should, so when you're having an app bar, you can access the title widget. But in our case, we don't want that because the title is always going to be at the top and we want this to be at the bottom. But luckily, app bar comes with bottom. And if you would paste that column here, it's also going to give an error because it's going to expect a preferred size widget again. But in this case, we just want to create a preferred size widget, or a preferred size, sorry, and then give it a preferred size. So, and then size, let's hit size, not from height, but in this case, we want size.0 because we already specified the size outside of the class. Hit Control Save, put some commas where needed to reformat, and now we are ready to build everything in here. So the first item is going to be, as you can see, example, a text widget called Floorplan screen. So let's quickly create that. Texts, first item, Floorplan screen, great. Then give it a style of text style, and then the color should be global.blue, which is not import yet, so import it, global.blue. You want a font weight to be the boldest as you can go, W900 would do, and a custom font size of 16, not 160 but 60.0. Hit a comma, Control S or Command S, and let's create the second item. So there's going to be of type icon. Oh, we're in the wrong scope. Hit a comma in here, second item in the array of the column. would be icons, see, and then a sort of arrow. We need a drop down arrow. Let's also give it the same color, global.blue, put a comma in here, and let's do a hot restart. But first, remember, we still need to import it in our floor plan screen, because at the moment that preferred size was still using a container. Put a comma behind here, and now we can create our app bar widgets. So app bar widgets, that's imported, and now let's do a hot restart. Restart it without errors. Great, floor plan screen. So what you still want to do now is that you want to, let's go back to, let's give it a background color as well. And the color should be colors.white. You can just hot reload and that should do the trick. Well, there you go. Great, good progress. So let's now create our main grid view builder. So we can go to our widget folder again, right click on the widget folder and add a new Dart file. And this time we're going to call it the grid view widget. Let's make it stateless again and name the class correctly. So we got a grid view widget like this. Import the libraries. Right, so at the root we would expect a grid view, of course. And then the grid view, what we need is just like list view builders, a grid view also has a builder method. We can create it. It expects a grid delegate. So let's import the grid delegate, which is of type silver grid delegate. But not just as a grid delegate, it is with, so grid delegate, let's type in the full name. And then we need with fixed cross-axis count. And you need to initialize, because this is actually a class. Let's import what we need. So the cross-axis count is 3. Why is that 3? That's because we have a 3x3 grid, isn't it? And that's what we want. So let's create 3. Put a comma, Control S. Let's just add right at the bottom semicolon. Also, let's create our item builder, which is expecting a context and also the index, and then open it, and this is expecting a return of a widget. So let's return, in this case, a container, give it a color. Again, global.blue would be our color. Let's import that, blue, there you go. And then give it a child, and the child is actually going to be displaying our images. So we can have image.asset. And if you look at the asset folder, I've provided the images for you, which are going to contain 9 tiles, because we're splitting our floor plan up in 9 tiles, right? So we can access that, images, /tile _0, and then we would have the index, which we provided at the top. So let's go in here. What we actually need is we need the current index, or current tile, I'm gonna call this, and this basically is index +1, because the indexes are starting on 0 and our tile names are starting on 1, so that's quite important. Then in here you hit $ and then current tile, and then just make sure you add the extension, which is of PNG, and that basically should do the trick. So let's do a hot restart just to see the formatted style, and now we can go, let's close this folder as well, and now we should go to our floor plan screen, and let's import our grid view, because we are displaying a, that's empty container at the moment, right? So we can add the child in here. Let's import it. Let's do a hot restart again, and let's see what we are displaying. Great. Notice the error. Oh, Just make sure when we go to the grid view, we also have a item count, right? Because by default, it's gonna do something when you don't provide an item count. We only want 9 items. That should make the error go disappear. Great, so it's restarted. We just need to add some properties as well. Shrink wrap to true because we are gonna scale maps, and otherwise it's gonna give some errors as well. That's fine. I'll restart again. So now let's center it. And you see, because we are not using a center here, the container is gonna adapt to the width or the height of the grid view, which is not what we want. We want this to be full screen. You can solve that really quick, going to floor plan screen and wrapping the grid view widget in a center widget, hit hot reload, and see the magic happening. So at this moment, we're having our floor plan, right? But now, to take it to the next step, we want to add these circular white dots, right, that indicate how many items or objects are available. So how would we do that? Well, the first step would be we need to go to our models folder, right click and create a new Dart file. I'm gonna call this just models. Let's create a light object, light class. And these are going to contain everything we have in our global value, right? Or basically our map in here. So the location, name, status, position, and the tile number. So let's head over and create those. So the string location, just like that. Then the string name, like that. Then a Boolean status, which is the status of the light. Either way, a light is on or it's off. Then we get a list of doubles, which is going to contain the position. The position is the actual position on the screen when you are zooming in, right? So when you can actually see the light objects individually aligned or positioned in their current tile. So that's what these are. And then we got an int, the tile, which is going to contain the tile numbers, which goes from 0 to 9, of course. Then let's create our constructor, and this is going to be a from map constructor, which is going to expect that data object we just created in our global class, and then open the curly braces and set up the constructor. So this dot location would be the data. Just always make sure these are correct, otherwise it will throw an error. But if it does, we can customize our errors with, for example, no location, semicolon, and go to the next one. Well, let's just copy this, because otherwise it's going to be too much typing for the sake of this course. This dot name, name, and then no name. There you go. Paste it again. Then the status, and just make sure when you would get an error here, you don't return a string, but it is expecting a Boolean. If you would return a string and this value would be null, it's going to throw an error as well. Then display position, or let's copy it again. Look for the position, type in position, and then just make sure we add an array of double, which is an empty 0.0, and then also the display tile, name it tile, and then when it would be null, but it would never be null because we have everything stored in our global value. If you would be working with a database, you always need to make sure you create optional values. So now let's make use of the data or the model object we just created. Let's go to our floor plan model, which is empty at the moment, and let's create our first variable. The variable should be of type list, and then it's going to contain our light. Let's leave that for now. And it's going to be named, so a private variable called lights, and then we want global.lights, and I want to map every item, right? Every item in that global lights object, I want to map it to our constructor of the light object or the light class. So we have light. Let's import that as well. So our models, now we have access to the from map, and this is the maps are the items, because remember, when we go to the lights, this is actually an array of objects, or it's an array of maps, and that's what you want in here. So whenever this is accessing, just make sure you add two lists to the end as well, because it is expecting a list and not just a map. And a map is an iterable, but you need to downcast it back to a list widget so you can use it, or a list item so you can use it here again. This is a private variable, so let's create a getter method for it. And I do this because when you wouldn't create a getter method and you wouldn't make this private, outside of the class you could still change this or delete the array, and that's not what you want. Because the getter method is quite safe in this case, because it's just going to return it, but you can't modify it outside of the class, right? So now to display our circle dots, you can see in the example, let's head back to our grid view widget, and let's make sure we import it. So what we're going to do here, we're going to create a stack, so you can wrap it with a column, and change the column to a stack, which is the same, it expects children as well. Then at the top of the stack, we want to add those circle avatars. And the circle avatar, it's just going to be a circle. The background color should be white. There you go. And then that child should be of text. And at the moment, we're just going to display this as is. Let's just add child. There we go. There we go. It's doing a hot reload. Obviously, these are all going to be null, but that's fine for the moment. Let's hit the alignment of the stack as well. So alignment.center, do a hot reload again. Great, just like in the example. Now let's populate it with our data, right? So how would we do that? We would create a local variable of our lights object called lights. Let's import our models class, and I'm gonna call this tile lights. So if you think about it like this, right, we need to make sure, we need to map, or we need to find the items that are on that tile and display how many items there are on that tile, right? How would we do that? Well, we can make use of our model, and we still need to provide that model. We can do at the top, which is used by provider. So we can do final model and then provider, provider dot, and then import our provider package, say off the context, and just make sure we specify the type behind the off. So that would be our main model, which is floor plan model. So at least we have a type. Great. Now in here we can say model.lights, which is our getter method. We cannot set it, we can just get it. And then we want to select where, right? And the where is going to look for all the items in that array. But we want to be very specific with what we do. So that item, we want to check item dot. See, now we get access to that light model. Otherwise you would have to specify this by hand, but that's why we are using some custom model. It's just easier to use them around your app, basically. So item dot, we want to select the item dot tile would be the current tile. Remember, current tile is the index +1. And then again, because we're using iterable, we need to downcast this to a list, and then the error should go away. Great. So now, if I would, instead of using this 0, we can just say, okay, great, $, and 2 curly braces, and then we can say tileights.length. Simply as that. Let's also add a style of text style, and then let's give it a color, global.blue again, put a comma. Just do a hot restart and see everything getting nicely formatted. Let's have a look. Great. So now at least we have the correct items for the correct tile. So to finish this product, we just need to wrap everything in a gesture detector and it's done, right? Well, unfortunately, when you're zooming and panning at the same time, Flutter by default doesn't really allow you to do that. It will allow you to scale everything, but then if you want to horizontally and vertically pan at the same time, something doesn't work. And I tried this before, and I find this really confusing, the way they set things up. For example, you can set things up with a gesture detector, which will allow you to do any panning you want. But if you combine zooming with it, it's gonna fail, and the zooming will always work. But then, for example, the vertical scroll will not work, and the horizontal scroll will work. So in order to solve this, you need to create your own sort of gesture detector. And you can make use of the raw gesture detector. And that is something we will implement. It's actually not that hard to implement yourself. It's just overrides some certain methods. So in our case, we can zoom and pan left or right or up and down at the same time, which is what we want in our case. So we get a sort of Google Maps functionality in our app. I don't know why Flutter didn't do this by default, but I mean, that's just the way it is. And so let's head over to our widget folder and right click and create a new Dart file, which is gonna be our raw gesture detector widget. There we go. Type in stateless and make the class name the raw gesture detector widget. Hit enter on the red square, import material, and at the root of the application, let's start by creating a raw gesture detector. Put a semicolon there, great. So this is gonna expect a few things, right? So it's gonna expect gestures, which is gonna be something we're gonna create privately, gestures. The child is gonna be a container. And that container is going to have a color again of, you guessed it, global.blue. So let's import that as well. There you go. And then the main child is going to be a transform. And then we need to set an alignment, which also is going to be a private variable called alignment. There we go. And a transform, also something we need to specify at the top, transform. There we go. And then the main child is gonna be of type, well, just the child we specify at the top, because we're gonna use this so we can pass in a widget. So let's create a final widget at the top called child. Let's copy the name of the class to set up the constructor. Open the curly braces and set display child. Then add a semicolon, and we can use that child. Also, let's make sure we give the child some padding in here. Not default 8, but yet let's use 20. Let's quickly go outside of the class and create a custom class. And this class is called drag and scale. And we need to do this to override a certain gesture, which is by default by the gesture detector. So let's import that library gestures. Next thing, all the way at the top of the build method, let's import the size. Let's firstly create our gesture widget, which is containing the, this is gonna contain our model, and we would specify these in our model in a bit, but for now let's leave them empty. So what is this doing? It's using this, the class we just created and returning it in its case, and it's gonna create an instance where you have access to these onStart, onUpdate, or onEnd properties. Let's create the alignment property. This is just to create a fractional offset from the center, and we're using that size.width divided by 2 because we always want the actual center of the screen because we're moving the map around. And then these ones is specifying the width and height of our canvas. So left and top, and then all the way of the width of the screen and all the way the height of the screen. Lastly, let's just create our matrix property. We still need to go all the way at the top and import something called the vector mat, and we need to show the vector3 class so we can use that wherever we want it. Let's for now remove these scale properties because these are accessing our model class, and I want the scale actually to be 1, 1 at the moment, so all the errors will go away, 1, 1. And translate, we're not translating at the moment, so let's make this null. Let's check to see if all the errors are gone, hit Ctrl S, and this is our main setup for the raw gesture detector, right? Let's navigate to our floor plan model and finish the whole state management so we can actually start displaying and scaling around and we can see some results. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a class which is going to store my points or the position actually, and we can access X or the Y values. Next up, let's create all the variables we want to declare. And I'm not going to type in one by one because it's going to be a bit too much typing for this tutorial, but it's really easy setup. You have a scale, a previous scale. This is for when you're zooming. You have a position, which is using that class we created. Previous position the same, and the end position as well. By knowing that, and for safety reasons, let's create our getter methods, which are just pointing to the same thing, but they just allow us to not modify them outside of this class, because the brain of the app is happening in the floor plan model. Then there's just a function or a boolean. We want to be able to check whenever the user has touched the app, because remember at the beginning we were showing some sort of overlay widgets that we were using whenever users started it and whenever the state changes, so we're using that to track it. So let's create our first function called the handle drag scale start. Let's import our gestures and let's do all the necessary. From this moment we know the has touched needs to be set to true. Then we are doing as well the previous scale would be the normal scale, right? And then we also set the previous position dot x would be equal to our details, and then accessing the focal point dot dx as well, and we divide that for the scale. Why are we dividing by the scale? Because we want this to be normalized at any time. If you wouldn't do that, that means if you would be scaled in and you would move around, it would move 3 times as fast. So this needs to be normalized at all costs. And then you want to subtract that from the end position. Otherwise, it's going to jump when you pan the next time. Then the previous position.y should be kind of similar. Let's paste that in as well. And then do the details.dy divided by scale, and then the end position.y as well. Then, at the end of the case, it should notify all the listeners, so our state gets updated successfully. Then, let's create the scale update methods, which is handle drag scale updates. This is going to be, the main part of the app. Then, at the beginning, at the top, you want to set that scale to be the previous scale times the details.scale, if we are scaling basically, because that's where it would come from. We want to set some limitations for the app. You can say whenever the scale is bigger than 2.0, that's what we want to see the grouped individual light objects. So we can set the is scaled the is scaled to be true. Otherwise, it's going to jump back to false. So you can copy this line, put it to false, and that's it for that setup. Then make sure the user can only scale for a limited amount. So you can set whenever the scale is smaller than 1.0, which is normal. You don't want to be scale normal, so the scale would just be 1.0. In the other case, or in the other state, else if scale bigger than 4, not question mark, but bigger than 4.0, what do we want to do then? We want to limit it to 4. This allows you to not scale bigger than anything than 4. You can customize this whatever you want. Then another else if statements. Whenever the previous scale is equal to our scale, in that case, we want to set some position adjustments. So position.x equals details.focalpoint.dx, and divide that by the scale. Again, why? Because we want to normalize it. Because always remember, we are zooming and panning at the same time. The previous position.x. Then we can copy this line and do the same thing for the y. So position.y, focalpoint.dy, still divided by the scale and subtracted from the previous position.y. You're gonna notice when you mess around to these values, like you really need to respect what you're doing here, because otherwise the panning and the zooming will give very strange results, and this is a very abstract way, but you need to set this up correctly, and that's very important. Lastly, so let's set up the final method when it ends basically. Then you want to set the previous scale to be back to 1.0 and the end position to be position again, and then you want to notify the listeners. Hit S to format. Let's create a final method called reset, and remember we are using the reset to reset it to its original values. What we can do is we can copy everything we have. So let's copy all these values, right? Paste them here and remove it. So we are using the right value, and you're just resetting everything to its initial state when the things are loaded. Remember not to forget to call to notify the listeners. And that's it for all the methods at the moment. Also, let's quickly test out our row gesture detector if it's actually working. Let's wrap this grid view with our row gesture detector widget. Let's import this. Let's put some commas in here, just reformat. What we want to do now is that we go to the gesture detector widget, and then we should want to access our model. And then all the way at the top, let's create our model. Final model is provider. And I think this is where provider comes in really handy, just when you have a lot of widget classes and you want to access that data correctly. .context, great, and then specify the type of floor plan model, great. So now let's just scroll to the bottom and look for the transform property, and this is where the magic is going to happen. We can use the model.scale for the diagonal tree, because that's responsible for scaling. Let's copy this in these other tree, and then the translate model.position.x. Copy this and do the same thing for the y. And you see, if you hide the business logic in here, you see how clean that reads, right? So it's quite nice and tidy. Let's do a hot restart, and fingers crossed if we hope our zooming is gonna work, right? So we got a panning. You can test if the panning is working because it's following the dot, and we can scale at the same time, and you can see the panning is following exactly where we are in the grid. So that's why we were always dividing by scale, so it's always normalized, so it wouldn't move around 3 times as fast, right? Let's finish our grid view, because remember, when we are scaling, we want to see the individual light objects and not just the one we have at the moment, because the moment when we scale, it's always going to be this tree, and right now we should be able to see our individual light objects. So let's do that. So we need to have some sort of conditional. So we have access to our model, and we want to make sure whenever it is scaled to a certain point, we want to display that. Otherwise, we want to display this. So what is it going to be? The root in here. This is going to contain another stack, and let's give it some children in here. And we actually don't want to make use of the array property, because we are going to create a list. Why? Because we're going to have multiple objects, right? So let's create that list, and the length is going to be tile light.length. As simple as that. Then create not an index, because we want to call this IDX, because remember, we are in a grid view already, which is using this property. So let's not confuse the one with another. Let's convert this to a block body, so the arrow goes away, and we can do everything we want in here. So what is going to be the main return? We should have some transform dot translate. Why is that? Because every item is going to have a unique position on the map. This is going to expect an offset, so let's give it that offset class. What do you want to do at the end of the return? We are putting a comma. Let's add in the offset variables. So for example, this is going to be, we are accessing the size dot, we still need to specify that. Let's copy it where we used it before. I think it was in the gesture detector widget. Here you go. Let's copy that. Let's go back to grid view. Right underneath model, let's import this. And okay, now we have access to size.width. Let's use that. do it times the tile lights array. Access the right index. Make sure you call this IDX and not index, and use the positions. First position is going to be the X. Great, you can copy this line now. Tile lights IDX positions.1. Great. Put a comma in here, hit save. So what else do we want to do? We can write another child, and let's call this a stack. There you go. And given it alignment dot center. So we need center. Great. And then give it the children we need. So that's the first one, is going to be a circle avatar again, which is going to use a background color. And then we have to access that tile lights with the right IDX index. And we want to check for the status, because whenever the lights are on, I want to display them in a green accent. So let's do that. Add the green accents. And then otherwise it's just going to be white. So let's use the white color. Great. Let's hit S. Just make sure. Okay, that's one item. Then the radius 5.0, but feel free to experiment with it. Give it a child, give it a center, and give that center a child as well. Then that's gonna be our icon basically, and the icon is gonna be an icons.lights, light bulb outline. And then put a comma here, give it a color. That should be global.blue. Great, we have access to it. Remove that N. Hit save again. Cool. And let's give it a custom size to be 7. I've experimented with it a bit. I don't know it is by hand, but I'm just and then another transform, because we want to transform the text away from it. So let's hit transform matrix 4.identity, not inverted, but identity. There you go. And dot translate, and which allows you to transfer anything you want. So I'm going to transfer the X value. Give this a child of text, and that text should be tile lights, using that index, the right name, or you can see whatever you want. You can add the description, but we're going to use name. Give it a style, of text style. Great. And then use a custom font size 6.0, because we're zooming in and we want this to be quite small. And then a color, colors.white. Great. Put a comma here. Great, so we have this check whenever it scales. So let's test this out at the moment. We have no error, so that's good. We're gonna zoom in. Great, look at that. How easy was that? So now we get our individual light objects with the custom name, the one we access from our local data object, and they're scaling at a certain rate when it's 2 times the scale. So this will go into, it's kind of a detail mode. So if you look closely, because we're using this, we customize our scroll behavior, you're gonna see this overlay, but because we're using blue, you barely see it. But I want to get rid of this kind of glowing indicator, right? So how would we do that? It's actually not that hard. We can go quickly to our gesture widgets, go all the way at the top, and create a new class. And I'm gonna call this remove scroll glow. And that's extending scroll behavior, and what it's doing, it's gonna return an empty child at the moment. So how would we implement that? Scroll all the way at the bottom, and we should wrap this padding, right? And you can wrap it with a center, and then rename this into a scroll configuration. And then this has a certain behavior to it, and we want that behavior to be remove scroll glow. And that's the class we specialize at the top. Do a hot restart, so we can see it in action. See, and now that's the scroll glow is gone. Let's head over to our floor plan screen and add in the final touches, which is going to be that overlay screen you saw at the beginning. So how would we do that very quickly? We should wrap the this in a stack, so not a column. So we can change that to stack, And what we're gonna do here, again, we're gonna have some sort of conditional that's gonna have a, we need access for that model. So let's create our provider. I'm just gonna copy this from another class. This is what we need. Let's copy that really quick, go to the Floorplan screen, underneath the build method, paste this, import provider, and then import our Floorplan model. Great. So what we got now is we got access to the has touched boolean. Whenever this has touched, we're gonna create two widgets, right? So one is the reset button widget. Great. And the other one is the overlay widget. Great. Let's remove this for now and let's create those. Head over to your widgets folder and create a new file. I'm gonna call this the reset button widget. There you go. Type in as stateless and import that class, or the class we typed in before. Let's import material, not widgets. Material, great. So what do we want at the top? Let's create an align, because remember we were in a stack and we want to align this at the bottom of the screen. So let's select the alignment and then dot bottom center. Great. Let's add a child. That child should be a raised button to start with. This has an on-pressed functionality to it. And it also has a child, and that child is going to be of type icon. So let's create that icon. This should be icons.refresh. Let's find it here. There you go. And then give it a color. Colors.white. Great. Then what you do want to do is you want to give that raised button a color as well, which is going to be the background color. We want to have that global.blue. I'm gonna import this, finish it here, and then what you do want to do as well, you want to give it a bit more elevation so it stands out more, like 10. Let's hit S, and what we want to do in the reset, you want to do model.reset, but our model doesn't exist yet. So let's go underneath the build method and let's create that provider. Import all the libraries, the arrows go away, and this should do the reset. Let's go to the widget folder again, and now let's create our overlay widget. Create a new Dart file. I'm gonna call this overlay widget. There you go. Create a stateless and call this overlay widget. There you go. Again, import this all the way at the top. What we need? We need an ignore pointer. Why do we need that? Because we're stacking things on top of each other, and when the user starts basically by dragging, you want to ignore this pointer because otherwise we can't drag the map in the first place. So we need to set this to true. You can also use an absorb pointer and use absorbing the true. It should be the same thing basically. But we're going to use ignore pointer. Let's create a container. Let's give it a color, and we should have again the global.blue. Let's import that. And then we want some opacity with it to make sure the screen is visible so you can see the underlying map. Let's create another child of this. Let's center it, just make sure, and then that child is going to be a column, and that column is going to have some children in here. Hit S, fill in the column array. First one, icon. I'm using the icon.touch. See this icon, so you know you can touch it. Give it a color, colors.white. Great. And then a custom size or around 40, and then hit a comma behind. Again, hit S. Use a size box to have some custom scaling in here, or it's just gonna be the height, not size, but we need a sized box. And then a height of 10. It's going to be our separator for the next object, which is going to be a text widget. And then we had this start by dragging with your fingers, if I can remember it. Yeah, I think that's it. And then just make sure you add a sorted text align and use text align.center, and then add finally that style of text style again, and give it a color. colors.white. Great. Now we can head back over to our floor plan screen, and we should be able to import these libraries like so. All the errors are gone. Fingers crossed. Hit hot restart. Did it already? Oh yeah, it already restarted. So let's have a look. We are able to do this. Let's just make sure our alignment is correct. So in the stack alignment, let's set the alignment.center. Then the final thing, we just need to make sure, let's see what we're doing here. Start by dragging with your fingers. That overlay widget. And let's set the main axis alignment in here. Also .center. Do a hot restart. There we go. So now at this stage, we are start by dragging with your fingers. The only thing we still need to do, oh no, actually we're done, because we have the reset button, so you can test it, right? There you go. So we can reset back to the beginning. Obviously, you can add some custom padding to that bottom, but I think that's it for this tutorial, and I hope you guys enjoyed it, to be honest.